White Swan Colony, Solikamsk, Russia. 2025. Inside cell 47, a prisoner named Dmitry Kuznetsov clears his throat. Just a small cough. Nothing loud. Barely audible. Within seconds, a guard appears at his cell door, opens the food slot, shouts, "Violation! 5 days isolation." Dmitry protests. "I just coughed. I'm sick. 10 days. You spoke." Dmitry falls silent immediately. But the damage is done. He's just earned 10 days in a punishment cell, a concrete box even smaller than his already tiny cell. No bed, no toilet, just a hole in the floor and complete darkness. His crime? He coughed. Then he spoke 2 sentences defending himself. Welcome to White Swan, officially known as IK6, but called White Swan by inmates because of the white prison uniforms and the way the facility sits like a swan on the frozen Ural landscape. This is Russia's strictest prison, home to 200 of the country's most dangerous criminals, serial killers, mass murderers, terrorists, mafia bosses, cannibals, cop killers. But White Swan isn't just strict because of who's here. It's strict because of one rule that defines every moment of every day. Silence is mandatory. You cannot speak, cannot whistle, cannot hum, cannot sing, cannot make any vocalization above a whisper. If you do, punishment is swift and brutal. And that's just one rule. Wait until you hear about the Mittens. White Swan, IK6, is located in Solikamsk, in the Perm region of the Ural Mountains, about 900 miles east of Moscow. It's one of Russia's 6 Supermax facilities, designed to hold criminals deemed too dangerous for regular prisons. Think of it as Russia's answer to America's ADX Florence. Built in Soviet times and upgraded in the 2000s, White Swan houses approximately 200 inmates in conditions that human rights organizations have called psychological torture. The facility operates under a system called strict regime, the harshest classification in Russia's prison system. It's reserved for repeat violent offenders, those who committed crimes while already in prison, prisoners deemed especially dangerous to society, those who murdered law enforcement or prison staff. But here's what makes White Swan unique even among Russia's brutal prisons. The absolute silence rule combined with extreme sensory deprivation and bizarre restrictions designed to break the human spirit. If Black Dolphin, IK6 in Orenburg, keeps inmates blindfolded and bent over during transport, White Swan keeps them muzzled and mitted. Literally. Subscribe right now because the rules at White Swan are so extreme, you won't believe they are real. But they are. Every single one. The silence rule at White Swan is absolute. From the moment you wake up at 6 a.m. until lights out at 10 p.m., you cannot speak above a whisper. Even whispers are discouraged. You communicate with guards through gestures or by writing on a small chalkboard provided in your cell. Need toilet paper? Write it. Feeling sick? Write it. Have a question? Write it. Guards don't explain this rule. There's no orientation. You figure it out when you see other inmates getting punished for making noise. The punishment scale. First offense, warning shout from guard. Second offense, 3 to 5 days isolation. Third offense, 10 to 15 days isolation. Continued violations, transfer to even harsher conditions or beatings. Former guards who've spoken to Russian media explain the reasoning. Silence prevents inmates from communicating. No communication means no plots, no gang formation, no coordinated violence. But the real reason goes deeper. Silence breaks you psychologically. Humans are social creatures. We need verbal communication. Denying that need for years, sometimes decades, causes profound psychological damage. Depression, paranoia, hallucinations, complete mental collapse. That's the point. White Swan isn't just about containment. It's about breaking you so thoroughly that you can never be a threat again. Here's the rule that gives White Swan its nickname among inmates, the Mittens. Every inmate, upon arrival, is issued thick canvas mittens, like oven mitts but heavier. You must wear them at all times except when eating or using the toilet, and even then, guards monitor to ensure you put them right back on. Why? Official reason: to prevent inmates from hiding contraband or weapons in their hands. Real reason: to dehumanize, to make even basic tasks difficult, to remind you every second that you have no autonomy. Try buttoning a shirt with mittens on. Try writing with mittens. Try scratching an itch with mittens. You can't. Everything becomes harder. Everything takes longer. Everything requires more energy and causes more frustration. And if guards catch you without mittens outside of approved times, punishment is immediate. Usually isolation plus confiscation of mattress for a week, meaning you sleep on bare concrete. One former inmate who was released and fled to Europe described it. The mittens make you feel like an infant, like you can't even control your own hands. After months, you start to forget what your hands feel like. You stop thinking of them as part of you. Let's walk through a day for Dmitry Kuznetsov, our prisoner from the opening scene. 6 a.m. Wake-up alarm. A buzzer, not a voice. Guards never speak to inmates if they can avoid it. Dmitry sits up on his metal bunk. The cell is 6 feet by 9 feet. Concrete walls painted institutional gray. One barred window, 4 feet up the wall showing only sky. A metal toilet in the corner. A small table bolted to the wall. Nothing else. He puts on his mittens. He'd taken them off to sleep, which is allowed. 6:30 a.m. Breakfast. A metal tray slides through the food slot. Porridge. Black bread. Weak tea. Dmitry takes off his mittens, eats quickly, puts mittens back on before the guard checks. 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. Mandatory silence. Dmitry sits on his bunk. He cannot read. Books are rare, considered privileges. He cannot write. No paper except the small chalkboard. He can only think. 4 hours of sitting in silence. Every day. Some inmates pace. Back and forth. 6 feet one way. 6 feet back. 4 hours. Dmitry learned not to pace. It makes time move slower. 11 a.m. Lunch. Same routine. Mittens off. Eat. Mittens on. 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. More silence. Dmitry lies on his bunk. Stays at the ceiling. Counts the cracks in the concrete. He's memorized every one. 247 cracks. 5 p.m. Dinner. You know the drill. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Final silence period. Dmitry sometimes tries to remember songs in his head. But after years at White Swan, he can't remember the words anymore. Just fragments. Pieces of melodies that don't connect. 10 p.m. Lights out. Sleep in silence. Wake in silence. Repeat. This is every day. Every single day. 4 years. For some inmates. For life. Once per day, usually around 1 p.m. Inmates get 1 hour of recreation. You're escorted from your cell by 2 guards. You walk in silence, head down, mittens on, to a concrete recreation cage. The cage is approximately 10 feet by 10 feet. Concrete floor. Concrete walls on 3 sides. Metal bars on the 4th. A metal grate overhead showing sky. No equipment. No basketball hoop. No weights. Just empty concrete space. You can walk in circles. Do push-ups. Sit. That's it. And you do it alone. Always alone. White Swan never allows inmates to recreate together. The risk of communication, plotting, violence, it's eliminated by complete isolation. 1 hour in a concrete cage. Then back to your cell. Some inmates refuse recreation. What's the point? One former inmate said. Walking in a cage is more depressing than staying in your cell. But refusing recreation can be marked as non-compliance, which affects your file and can delay any chance of transfer to a lighter security prison. So most inmates take the hour, walk in circles, return to their cells, repeat tomorrow. The only time you're allowed to remove your mittens is during meals. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, all delivered through the cell door food slot. You never eat with others. Never see another inmate's face during meals. The meals themselves are minimal. Breakfast, porridge, often watery. Bread, often stale. Tea, always weak. Lunch, soup, mostly water and cabbage. Bread, occasionally a small piece of mystery meat. Dinner, kasha, buckwheat. Bread, tea. Calorie count is kept deliberately low, around 2,000 per day, barely enough for survival. Definitely not enough to maintain muscle mass or energy. You eat quickly because the food slot stays open for only 5 minutes. If you don't finish and return the tray in time, no more food until the next meal. And you eat in complete silence. If you make sounds while eating, slurping, chewing too loud, anything, guards will shout at you through the door. After a while, inmates develop silent eating habits. Chewing slowly, carefully, swallowing without noise. It becomes automatic. But here's the psychological trick. Even eating, one of the most basic human pleasures, becomes stressful. You can't enjoy food. You just consume it quietly, mechanically, fearfully. Nothing is allowed to be pleasant. Everything must be stripped of comfort. If this is already the most extreme prison you've heard of, hit that like button because we haven't even gotten to the punishments yet. When you break a rule at White Swan, and rules are broken constantly because they are almost impossible not to break, you get sent to Shizo. Shizo is the punishment cell system, a prison within the prison. The Shizo cells are even smaller than regular cells, approximately 4 feet by 7 feet. You can touch both walls with your arms extended. No bed. You sleep on concrete floor. No toilet. Just a hole in the floor that doesn't always drain properly. Temperature is kept deliberately cold, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit 10 degrees Celsius year-round. You're given a thin blanket but no mattress. 1 meal per day instead of 3. Usually just bread and water. No recreation hour. No light except what comes through a tiny slot in the door. Duration, usually 3 to 15 days depending on the violation. But here's the worst part. Shizo is where silence is enforced even more strictly. Guards will beat inmates who make noise in Shizo. No warnings. No second chances. Just beatings. Former inmates describe Shizo as where you go to forget you're human. And at White Swan, because the rules are so strict, most inmates spend at least a few days per month in Shizo. Some spend more time in Shizo than in regular cells. The guards at White Swan are specially selected and trained. They are not your typical prison guards. They are more like military enforcers, former special forces, men who've seen combat, men who don't have empathy to spare. They are trained in the White Swan method. Never speak to inmates unless necessary. Never show mercy or flexibility. Enforce rules immediately and harshly break the inmates psychologically. Guards rotate every few months to prevent any sympathy from developing. You never get to know a guard's face or personality. They are interchangeable enforcers. One former guard who left and spoke to media anonymously from outside Russia explained, "We told these men are monsters. Killers. Rapists. Terrorists. We told they don't deserve human treatment." After a while, you start to believe it. You stop seeing them as people. Guards communicate with each other through radios and hand signals. Even they don't speak much, modeling the silence they enforce. It creates an eerie atmosphere. A prison where even the guards barely talk. Just the sounds of footsteps, metal doors closing, and the occasional shout of violation. White Swan houses approximately 200 inmates at any given time. Here's who they are. Serial killers. Multiple convicted serial murderers. Men who killed 5, 10, 20 plus people. Russia's most prolific killers often end up here or in Black Dolphin. Cannibals. Yes, plural. Russia has had several cannibal cases, and survivors, who weren't executed, are often sent to White Swan. Terrorists. Islamic extremists. Chechen separatists. Anyone convicted of terrorism-related murders. Cop killers, Killing a police officer or prison guard in Russia guarantees you a spot in a Supermax like White Swan. Mafia leaders. Crime bosses deemed too dangerous to be in general population. Men who could still order hits from inside prison. Prison murderers. Inmates who killed fellow inmates or guards while already serving time. These men have nothing to lose. They are already serving life, so additional sentences mean nothing. White Swan is where they are sent to be neutralized completely. The common thread: these are men Russia has decided are beyond rehabilitation. Men who will never be released. Men who must be broken and contained. Let's return to Dmitry Kuznetsov, our prisoner from Cell 47. Dmitry is 41 years old. He's been in White Swan for 6 years. He has life without parole. He'll die here. His crime. In 2015, while serving time in a medium-security prison for armed robbery, Dmitry got into an argument with another inmate over a card game. The argument became a fight. Dmitry grabbed a sharpened piece of metal and stabbed the other inmate 17 times. The man died. Dmitry was already serving 15 years. The murder added a life sentence. And because he killed inside prison, proving he was especially dangerous, he was transferred to White Swan. For the first month, Dmitry tried to resist the silence rule. He'd whisper to himself, hum quietly, make small noises just to hear sound. Each time, punishment, isolation, beatings. After 3 months, Dmitry stopped making noise. He learned to exist in silence. After 6 months, he realized he'd forgotten how his own voice sounded. After a year, he stopped thinking in words. His thoughts became images, feelings, sensations, but not language. Language requires sound, even internal sound, and his brain had begun to associate all sound with pain. After 2 years, Dmitry had his first complete mental breakdown. Screaming, banging on the door, begging to be transferred anywhere else. He spent a month in Shizo for that breakdown. When he came out, he was different. Quieter. Emptier. Now, after 6 years, Dmitry rarely thinks at all. He exists. That's all. Inmates at White Swan are allowed to send and receive letters once per month. But the letters are heavily censored. Guards read every word. Any mention of prison conditions, treatment, guards, or anything that could be considered antestate results in the letter being confiscated and the inmate punished. So inmates learn to write safe letters. Dear Mother, I am well. I hope you are well. I think of you. Your son, Dmitry. That's it. Generic. Empty. Meaningless. And responses from family are equally vetted. Anything the censors consider problematic is redacted with black marker, so inmates receive letters that are mostly black squares with a few words visible. Some inmates stop writing letters entirely. What's the point? You can't say anything real. You can't receive anything meaningful. The isolation isn't just physical. It's complete, isolated from other inmates, from guards, from the outside world. You exist in a vacuum of silence and emptiness. Medical care at White Swan is minimal and brutal. There's a prison doctor who visits once per week. He walks down the cell block, and inmates can signal through their food slots if they need medical attention. The doctor looks at you through the slot. Maybe asks a question. Maybe not. Then either gives you basic medication, usually just aspirin, or determines you're fine. Serious medical conditions are mostly ignored unless you're literally dying. And even then, treatment is minimal. One former inmate described getting a severe infection in his leg. It took 3 weeks of persistent requests before the doctor even looked at it. By then, the infection had spread. The treatment was basic antibiotics and orders to rest. Dental care doesn't exist. If you have a toothache, you suffer. If a tooth needs pulling, it's done without anesthesia. Mental health care is non-existent. Depression, PTSD, psychosis, all ignored. You either survive mentally or you don't. There's a dark joke among inmates. The only way to get real medical care is to die. Then they have to file paperwork. Every day at White Swan is identical to the last. No holidays. No special meals for New Year or Easter. No variation in schedule. Some prisoners lose track of time completely. They don't know what month it is, what year, how long they've been there. Guards don't tell you the date unless you ask in writing, and even then, they might not respond. One former inmate said, "Time stops meaning anything. You're not waiting for something. You're just existing in an eternal present that never changes." This is psychological warfare. The human brain needs variety, novelty, change. Without it, cognitive function deteriorates. Memory fails. Personality fragments. Some inmates at White Swan have been there for 10, 15, 20 years. They are shells of who they were. Some can barely remember their own names. The routine hasn't just broken them. It's erased them. Comment right now. Could you survive 1 year at White Swan? Most people honestly couldn't. The psychological toll is that severe. Suicide attempts at White Swan are common. Inmates hang themselves using torn sheets, cut themselves with sharpened pieces of metal or plastic, starve themselves to death. Guards are trained to prevent suicide, not because they care about the inmates, but because suicides create paperwork and investigations. Cells are checked regularly for contraband that could be used for self-harm. Sheets are thin and easily torn to prevent hanging. Sharp objects are impossible to obtain, but desperate men find ways. One inmate managed to swallow a large piece of metal over several days, slowly damaging his internal organs until he died from internal bleeding. Another starved himself for 47 days before his body gave out. Guards force-fed him twice, but he vomited it up. Eventually, they just let him die. The official White Swan policy: suicide attempts result in shizo punishment if you survive. Think about that. You try to kill yourself to escape the suffering, you fail, and your punishment is more suffering. It's a closed loop of misery. Very few inmates ever leave White Swan. Most will die there, either from old age, medical conditions, or suicide. But occasionally, maybe once or twice per year, an inmate is transferred out, usually to a slightly less strict facility if their behavior has been exemplary for many years. The requirements for transfer consideration: 0 violations for at least 5 consecutive years, no communication with other inmates, complete compliance with all rules, written recommendation from multiple guards, approval from prison administration and regional authorities. Even meeting all these requirements doesn't guarantee transfer. It just makes you eligible for consideration. Dmitry, our inmate from cell 47, has been violation-free for 3 years. He needs 2 more before he's even eligible to request transfer. And even if he gets transferred, it won't be to a normal prison. Just a slightly less harsh one. Still life without parole. Still isolated. Just maybe with a few more privileges, like being allowed to talk occasionally. For most inmates, transfer is a fantasy. Something to think about during the endless silent hours. But not something they actually believe will happen. Very, very few people have left White Swan and lived to talk about it publicly. Most who leave are transferred to other prisons, where they remain. A tiny handful have been released, usually due to overturned convictions or pardons, and fled Russia. One such person, we'll call him Alexei, not his real name, spoke to human rights organizations after fleeing to Europe. His testimony: White Swan doesn't rehabilitate. It destroys. After 2 years there, I couldn't remember how to have a conversation. My voice sounded foreign to me when I finally spoke again. After 4 years, I'd forgotten what laughter sounded like, what music was, what human connection felt like. I was released due to a legal error in my case. They just let me go. But I wasn't the same person who went in. That person died in the silence. I still can't handle noise. Loud restaurants make me panic. I can't be in crowds. I sleep in complete darkness and silence because anything else terrifies me. White Swan freed my body but kept my mind. His testimony is one of the few windows the outside world has into what White Swan does to a person. International human rights organizations have condemned White Swan repeatedly. Amnesty International has called it a facility designed to inflict psychological torture. Human Rights Watch has documented systematic abuse, sensory deprivation, and cruel conditions. The European Court of Human Rights has received multiple complaints from Russian inmates about White Swan. Russia's response: these are dangerous criminals. Strict measures are necessary. Western human rights organizations don't understand Russian security needs. The Russian prison system, FSIN, Federal Penitentiary Service, defends White Swan by saying, "Inmates housed there are the most dangerous in Russia. Strict rules prevent violence and escapes conditions meet Russian legal standards. Criticism is foreign interference. And because White Swan is in Russia, and Russia doesn't allow outside inspections, there's nothing anyone can do. The silence continues. The mittens stay on. The suffering is invisible." How does White Swan compare to other notorious prisons? Versus ADX Florence, USA. ADX is harsh. 23-hour lockdown, minimal human contact. But inmates can speak, can watch TV, have more recreation options. White Swan is more psychologically destructive. Versus Black Dolphin, Russia. Black Dolphin blindfolds inmates during movement and forces them to walk bent over. White Swan uses mittens and silence. Both are uniquely brutal in different ways. Versus Halden Prison, Norway. Norway's approach is rehabilitation, comfortable cells, education, jobs. Russia's approach at White Swan is annihilation. Destroy the person so thoroughly they can never threaten anyone again. White Swan represents a philosophy. Some people are beyond saving, so break them completely. Whether you agree with that philosophy depends on your beliefs about punishment, rehabilitation, and human rights. Let's check in on Dmitry one last time. It's been 6 years since he arrived at White Swan. He's 41 years old but looks 60. Prison ages you fast. White Swan ages you faster. He wakes up, puts on his mittens, eats breakfast in silence, sits for 4 hours, eats lunch, sits for 5 more hours, eats dinner, lies down, sleeps, repeats. He's had 12 violations in 6 years, mostly for making small noises, coughs, sneezes, accidentally dropping something. Each violation meant days in shizo. He's 3 years away from being eligible for transfer consideration. He doesn't think about it much anymore. Hope is painful. Instead, he focuses on small things, counting the cracks in the ceiling, still 247, watching the light change through the small window as seasons pass, remembering his mother's face, though it's getting harder to picture clearly. He never thinks about the man he killed. Can't afford to. Guilt is a luxury. Guilt requires emotional energy he doesn't have. He just exists. Silent. Alone. This is his life now. This is his life forever. White Swan is part of a larger Russian prison system that houses approximately 400,000 inmates in over 700 facilities. Most Russian prisons are harsh by Western standards, but White Swan and the other 5 Supermaxes represent the extreme end of that harshness. The Russian approach to criminal justice is punishment over rehabilitation, isolation over integration, suffering as deterrent. It's a system rooted in Soviet-era gulags, modernized but not fundamentally changed. And it's largely hidden. Russia doesn't allow journalists into these facilities, doesn't permit international inspections, controls the narrative completely. What we know about White Swan comes from former inmates who've fled Russia, former guards who've spoken anonymously, leaked documents, legal complaints filed in European courts. The full truth is probably worse than what we know. White Swan Colony in Solikamsk, Russia, is a prison where silence is mandatory and inmates wear mittens. It sounds almost absurd when stated plainly. Mittens? Really? But the absurdity is the point. The rules aren't just about security. They are about psychological destruction. Silence isn't just a rule. It's a weapon. It isolates you from yourself, from language, from humanity. Mittens aren't just about contraband. They are about removing autonomy over your own body. Together, these rules, and dozens more we haven't covered, create an environment where human personality cannot survive intact. Is this justice? Or is it torture disguised as imprisonment? Russia would say, these are the worst criminals. They deserve no mercy. Human rights advocates would say, no human being deserves psychological annihilation, regardless of their crimes. There's no easy answer. The victims of these criminals suffered terribly. Their families deserve justice. But does justice require destroying a person's mind? Does protecting society require reducing humans to silent mit shells? Dmitry Kuznetsov sits in cell 47 right now, silent, wearing his mittens, staring at the ceiling. He killed a man. He deserved punishment. He got white Swan. Is he rehabilitated? No. Rehabilitation isn't the goal. Is he contained? Yes. Absolutely. Is he broken? Completely. And that's the point. White Swan exists because Russia decided some people don't deserve humanity. And in that decision, in that prison, in that silence, we see what happens when society decides some of its members are beyond redemption. The lights go out at 10 p.m. in cell 47. Dmitry lies down in silence. He'll wake up in silence. He'll live in silence. He'll die in silence. And the world will never hear his voice. If this documentary showed you a side of Russia's prison system you've never seen, watch this next video about Black Dolphin, the prison where inmates are kept blindfolded and never see daylight. Different prison, same philosophy, break them completely. Thanks for watching. And remember, some silences speak louder than words.